So we have this tremendous access to information today, right, which renders the world very different. So we are living in a transparent world today where every corporation, every government, every entity is really operating truly with glass walls. There are no secrets. If something deserves to be known, it will be known. So if you don't want to see what you are doing in your company or in your life on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow, well, you probably shouldn't do it. Because guess what? It will be out there. So that creates a check. As they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? So we have a lot of that today in the world. So we're tremendously better informed, and you combine that with this growth, tremendous growth, exponential growth in connectivity. Now, what does that mean? First of all, phone-based connectivity. We just crossed a significant milestone. Now we have more active phone numbers in the world than we have people. There are 7 billion people, 7.1 billion or so phone numbers. Some people have more than one number, and there are a few people still that don't, but that number is shrinking rapidly. You know, I used to do a lot of work in telecom. In the mid-1990s, there was a real verifiable statistic that said half of the world's population had never made or received a single phone call in their entire life. This was true as of 1995. Okay, and today homeless people have telephones in India and many other places. When I left India in the 80s, it took 14 years on a waiting list to get your phone. You put your name down, right? 14 years later, they show up with this big, black, ugly thing and say, where do I put this, right? And by the way, it doesn't work half the time. And when it does work, you've got literally a line of neighbors out the door. Because they're all saying, you know, my kid is calling, I'm receiving a call or whatever. So, you know, you're the only phone in the neighborhood. And you've gone from there to where we are today. It's a huge change. This is a life-altering technology, right? I mean, we take it for granted like we do so much else. But the fact is, this changes your life. And this now is something commonly accessible. And of course, if you look at things like social media, 950 million people now on Facebook, and there are many other technologies like that out there. It says that not only do we know more because of the internet, but now we are connected. We have a shared central nervous system of humanity on this planet now. Pretty much every node is connected to every other. We can connect to each other. We can let other people know information that they would like to know or need to know. And we can mobilize. We can create an activism around whatever we care about. You've heard about flash mobs, right? Suddenly you can send out messages and you can say assemble at this time at this place. And you look at the Arab Spring, I mean, so much of it people say, and I missed that presentation yesterday, but I'm sure this was part of it. So much of that is enabled by these technologies that people are able to get mobilized. It's a huge change. This one you may not be as familiar with. This is that we are becoming more intelligent as a species. The Flynn effect, you can look it up, says that human IQ has been rising at about 4% a decade on average for the last several decades, like 6 or 7 decades. That number gets normalized back to 100 every 10 years. So the raw number, the average is always 100. But if you remove that, somebody testing at 100 today would have been at 130 back in 1960, which is very high, right? Close to genius level. So the average person today is far more capable of grasping complexity and understanding sophisticated information than we used to be. And if you go back and look at old TV shows and look at old movies, okay, there's a certain charm to them, but at the same time, they are simplistic. You look at old sitcoms, I Love Lucy or whatever, back from the 60s and 70s, and you compare that to what you see on TV today. There's so much more nuance and subtlety and complexity in popular entertainment. You look at the novels, right, that average people read. I'm not talking about the literary few. I'm talking about the average person today is consuming information that is far more sophisticated than ever before. So somebody asked me, does this mean that we're all getting smarter? I said, no, it means your kids are smarter than you are. Okay. You're sort of fixed with your IQ. Can't really change that much. Now, of course, we can work on our emotional and spiritual and systems intelligence. All of that is possible, and that ultimately may matter even more. But this is significant too. Just the raw horsepower of intellectual ability is growing by leaps and bounds. And you combine that with access to education, and you multiply the effect of it. A century ago, only 9% of Americans finished high school. Today, well over 40% go to college. In societies like South Korea, 70+% now get a college education. This is a huge change, and the impact is greatest on women. So it used to be about 10, 15, maybe 20%, depending on the field of study, were women. Now in the US, across all disciplines, 60% of undergraduate students are women. And it is 70 plus at the master's and PhD level. And their grades are significantly higher. And they are graduating at a much higher percentage rate. In other words, they're not dropping out. So what is the impact of that? That in a few decades, every white-collar profession virtually will be dominated by women, numerically. We already have more women in the workforce in the US than we have men. They just crossed that threshold a few months ago. We refer to this as the feminization of the culture. It's a huge shift that is underway, and we're living through that right now. That for the first time in human history, after millennia of male domination and the domination of masculine values, in every societal institution, we're now going to see the rise of feminine values. Not only from more women, but also from the men. Remember, we all have masculine and feminine values, right? But they are systematically suppressed through society, and also there's some genetic or biological aspects to that, but all of that is starting to change very rapidly. And you see it happening quite dramatically. So if you go back 20 years, there was only one woman running a Fortune 500 company. As far as I know, it was Catherine Graham of the Washington Post company, and she was running it because her father had started it. Today there are 20 women running Fortune 500 companies. Most recently we had IBM, and I think Yahoo is also in that group, but we have DuPont and we have Kraft and we have many major companies now that are run by women. So that's still only 4%, 20 out of 500, but it is much better than what we were 10, 15 years ago, and I can bet that number will be 50 and maybe 100 in the next decade or so. 19% of board members today are women. Again, a low number in large companies, but that number is rising rapidly. At the other end of the spectrum, in entrepreneurial startups, 70% of new businesses are being started by women in the US. Many of them are refugees from the corporate world. They view the corporate world as inherently hostile to families and to their way of being. And therefore they're saying, I don't want to settle for that. I'm going to start my own business, like Manny did, that is consistent with my values, that what I believe in, right? It's not going to be run by that old rule book. So this is a fundamental shift. And what it's saying is that our culture is finally starting to integrate the feminine values, which we talk about nurturing and caring and compassion and relationships and thinking long-term and systems, versus winning and competition and domination and aggression and zero-sum thinking and immediate results, etc., the so-called masculine tendencies, that now we're starting to not only blend those two, but we're perhaps pushing the needle a little bit in that other direction. And that is a major shift in the world. 20 years ago, the only women you did see in positions of power were in the world of politics. Right? So we saw Margaret Thatcher in England. What was her nickname? The Iron Lady, right? We had Indira Gandhi in India. She was scary. Okay? She was called the only man in her cabinet. She wore beautiful saris like that, but she was tough. Okay? We had Golda Meir in Israel. Right? I mean, these were the only women you saw. Right? Because the only women who could make it in a man's world were the ones who could outdo the men at their own game. There had to be more of all of that than the men were. All of that is starting to change. McKinsey has done a study on leadership in this millennium. What does it take for leaders to be successful, and what are the new requirements for success? 2,000 interviews with CEOs. Halfway through, they changed the whole study. Because they found that the factors that they were uncovering as the essential requirements for success as a leader were things that men had to learn, and in fact they had to first unlearn old things, but that they came naturally to women. No, it's true. I'm not just pandering to the women. So they changed the study. The book is called How Remarkable Women Lead by Joanna Barsh of McKinsey. Right? And it really does capture the new world that we're coming into. It's a very rapid shift, as I said, and it also ties back to the aging of the population. So what happens to men as they age? Not that any of you would know in this room. But what happens? Is there a systematic change? Remember I talked about midlife values and meaning and purpose, but there's another thing that also happens, especially after 50. What happens to men? Sorry? Softer. Softer in the sense of more emotional, nurturing, caring, right? Showing their emotional side, right, caring side. Now, I see it in my father. See, my father is one of those traditional, cut from the old cloth, patrician, tough Indian fathers. Okay, he lays down the law and that's it. When you hear his car pull in, you have to better shape up and make sure everything is okay and be on your best behavior. Okay, it kind of instills a little fear. That's what dads are supposed to be or were. So I saw him cry for the first time in 1968. When I was 10 years old. We were living in California. We had just watched Robert Kennedy win the Democratic primary for president. And Nixon was in the White House, and the Vietnam War was raging, and Kennedy was going to come in and change the world and get us out of that war. And people were immediately tremendously inspired by what was happening. And then he was shot right after he gave his acceptance speech in that hotel room, in that hotel kitchen. And we are watching it live, and I see my father with tears streaming down his face. I said, wow, this must be a big deal. I mean, I was 10, I didn't know that much about what was going on, right? But this was to me a signature moment. It's one of those things I'll always remember. Now, for the next 35 years, I never saw him cry. I never saw him get close to being that emotional. His father died, his mother died, all kinds of things, terrible things happened over the years. But he never came close to exhibiting any of that. Now, the last 5 years, I go to India 4 or 5 times a year, and on average, he might cry like 5 times. It's not just that, oh, there you are again, right? You're like, I mean, he gets emotional, he gets sentimental, he gets choked up, right? Maybe when I come and I leave, looking at some old pictures, whatever it is, he gets sentimental. And I see him with his grandchildren, right? He's hugging them and he's kissing them every time he sees them, and I love you. And I said, who is this guy? Where's my father? Right? I never got a hug. Right? This is a whole new person. But this is predictable. This happens. Right? And so when more people in society are in that phase, I remember when Obama was giving his State of the Union address a couple of years ago, and he is coming in and he's actually hugging all the senators, including the men, including Republicans. And one of the Republican commentators on TV said, well, I guess that's what we do nowadays, we just hug. It's like he couldn't imagine this. What is all this hugging, right? What happens to women as they age? It's interesting. They get more confident and more assertive. Young women are deferential almost to a fault. Even if they know the answer with absolute certainty, they won't say it. They'll say, wouldn't you want to consider this? Right? Very indirectly, and most men being, they say, whatever. They just ignore that and move on, right? But as women get older, they actually get confident and more assertive while holding on to what makes them, their feminine attributes in the first place. Those don't go away, but they actually add to that some degree of confidence and assertiveness. So you put all of that together, it says fundamentally the needle is shifting dramatically and it's moving rapidly. Do you know that in Switzerland, women did not have the right to vote until 1971? And 2 Novembers ago, they swore in their first female majority government in Switzerland. This is the rate of change that we're experiencing in the world today. So lastly, we are becoming more conscious. In addition to all those changes, we are on this journey of never-ending increasing consciousness. What does that mean, to be conscious? At a very simple level, it simply means to be mindful. I think yesterday also Richard defined it in a certain way, right? Mindful with awareness, or awareness with attitude, or
awareness with a purpose.
With a purpose, right? More conscious, right? We're more mindful, more awake. We see reality as it truly exists. We have a much finer sense of right and wrong. Think about it. 150 years ago, slavery was the law of the land, not only in the US, but in many countries around the world. It was accepted as a normal part of human existence. And by the way, even many slaves had actually mixed feelings about it. Some of them actually accepted it as the condition, and they didn't want the full freedom. 100 years ago, hardly any women on this planet had the right to vote. In fact, in the US, it was 1920 when women got the right to vote, and many women were okay with that. They said, why do I need to vote? What do I know about all of that, right? 50 years ago, we had segregated societies in the US. 30 years ago, we had apartheid over here, right? We had child labor, we had environmental abuse, we had animal abuse, we had all kinds of things that were accepted, and today they're starting to fall one by one. Until a year ago, we had don't ask, don't tell as the policy in the US military, right? Where gay people had to stay hidden in some fashion. And all of those barriers are starting to change. And there are things that we are doing today that we will look back on in a decade or two and say, wow, how did we tolerate that? That doesn't jive with what it means to be human. And so we start to look at some of these other trends as well, including this one on rejecting violence. Now, this is interesting. Steven Pinker has a new book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, and he has documented the fact that we are living in the most peaceful time in human history. There are fewer people dying of violent means today through warfare, through murder, through terrorism, and even through accidents, car accidents and other things, than ever before. There's less violence in schools. There's less violence in homes. Right? All of these things are happening. And yet, it doesn't feel like that because the few things that do happen, of course, get multiplied by all the media that is out there today and the fact that we have instant access to information all over. But in reality, and that's part of what it means to be at a higher level of consciousness, you know that violence does not really solve the problem. It simply plants the seeds for a larger problem to come. Right? And we're starting to now recognize that and move in that direction. And finally, it means living in harmony with nature. For the longest time, it has been about conquering nature and overwhelming it with our technology and our inventions. But now we're starting to recognize the consequences and the limitations of that. It's like going from a motorboat to a sailboat. A sailboat actually harnesses the forces of nature, the wind and the currents, in order to get where you need to go. Whereas a motorboat is simply about overpowering. But it has, of course, a bunch of negative consequences on the environment and on other things. So we are definitely on this journey. So if you start to put all of these things together, the dramatic shifts that we have gone through in terms of geopolitical changes, in terms of demographic shifts, in terms of multiple technological revolutions, in terms of access to education, in terms of rising intelligence, and of course our greater consciousness, it says that the world today is fundamentally different than it was just a few decades ago. And therefore, we cannot continue to operate with business as usual. It simply does not work and will not work. And as Abraham Lincoln said in a very different context, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. Our challenges are new, therefore we must think afresh. And that applies very much to the world that we're in today. We have to relinquish and move past all of the old mental models. We almost have to start with a clean slate. If I were reinventing this corporation today, what would I start with? What are some of the factors that are necessary? So what does it take, what will it take for companies to flourish in the future? And I believe it's two things. First of all, that companies will have to be in tune or in harmony or aligned with and benefit from all of the things that I just outlined. The fact that people are more intelligent, the fact that they are better informed, the fact that they can communicate with each other, the fact that they are conscious of higher things, the fact that their value system asks for different things, all of that should be good for our business as it is constructed. Now, many businesses cannot say that. A smart customer is not necessarily good news for every business, right? And the good news is those businesses will get weeded out very quickly. They simply will not survive. So we have to make sure that we are in tune and aligned with and benefiting from all of these changes. But beyond that, that's more reactive. Beyond that, we have to actually exhibit the same level of consciousness that all of our stakeholders are now experiencing. Business, being a virtual person, has to be a highly conscious, evolved entity, right? Just as we talk about leaders and individuals becoming more evolved. So as Fred Kaufman put it, a conscious business is one that fosters peace and happiness in the individual, mission accomplishment in the organization, and respect and solidarity in the community. All of these things can go together and they must go together. They're not in conflict and it's not a trade-off. It's not that you can make money and achieve your mission or that you can make people happy and give them a good life, etc. You have to do all of those things together, and as it turns out, you actually can. Those things actually are very consistent with each other. So I'll just use one company as an example to illustrate the principles and tenets of what we call conscious capitalism. And this is Whole Foods Market, which is now about a $13 billion company. It's the world's largest retailer of natural and organic grocery products, but also now they're in a variety of other businesses too, with that general theme. And they started in 1978 in Austin, Texas. And right from their founding, they had a very clear set of values as well as a sense of purpose about why they were creating this business. This was not just another sort of a business opportunity, let's create a grocery business because you can make money there. They had a purpose, and the purpose was, in one way, to articulate it, that it matters what you put into your body. It matters to your health and the health of the food system and the health of the planet as a whole. And that most people are not conscious of that, they're not aware of it, and therefore they're experiencing all kinds of negative things. Do you know that in 1960 in the United States, we spent 5.7% of GDP on our health care and about 14% on food. And today it's about 19% on health care and 8% on food. So those lines are going like this. And you think there's a correlation between those? What you put into your body and what happens to your body? Right? As they say, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. Right? You can buy all these cheap calories and then suffer the consequences, or you can do what it takes to live not only healthy but flourishing and vibrant lives. So that is their purpose, and it's as relevant today as it ever was. In fact, even more so, because all of the crises, as I said, all those public epidemics that we're talking about, public health issues are more pronounced than they were. The second thing is this notion of interdependence. On their website, you'll find the Declaration of Interdependence, which was crafted by a group of their employees a few years after they were founded to codify what was already there in practice, to say we are part of this interdependent ecosystem of stakeholders, and that each of their well-beings is important in its own right, and that there should be no exploitation of any of them for the benefit of any others. If you systematically exploit your suppliers or your employees for the benefit of your customers and your investors, well, guess what? Over time, you will destroy that system, and you will destroy its ability to generate value for anybody. So business is like a complex living organism, and we have to tend to the health of the whole organism. It's not like a machine that you put in raw materials and human resources and other things, and money comes out at the other end, right? This is a living organism, and we have to look at it in that way. So when things are interdependent and interconnected, it stands to reason that all of them have to flourish at the same time. It's like your body. If something happens in this finger, eventually it can take down the whole system, right? So we have to think about it in those terms. The third is that number 19:1, which is the ratio of the highest pay to average pay at Whole Foods. Nobody can get paid more than 19 times. They have voluntarily adopted a salary cap, which used to be 9:1, became 12, 14, and now 19:1 for the last 10 years, and it has stayed there. Just for comparison, at the typical publicly traded company in the US, that ratio has fluctuated between 350 and 500:1 in the last few years. Average CEO pay so a company of this size, the average CEO pay would be about $14 million. Here it's about 800,000 at most, because the average is about 45,000. That's a huge difference. So there are people who are running this company that could go out and make 20 times more what they're making today. And yet they have not lost a single person in the last 10 years from senior leadership, anybody who they wanted to keep. Why is that? Leaders are driven by a combination of three things: power, personal enrichment, or purpose. And if you use money as the only way to attract a leader, if they were to hire a search firm and say, we're going to pay our next CEO not only $15 but $18 million because we want somebody better than average, do you think they'll get a far more effective leader than the people they have today who passionately care about natural and organic and the purpose of the business? No, they'll get somebody who comes in, who cares about money and who knows how to fix a balance sheet, and they'll do all the things to get the numbers right and maybe raise that stock price in the short term. But guess what? Stock price is doing just fine, 1,800% in 10 years. Okay? With a set of people who don't really care about profits as the primary thing, they care about doing the right things as a business and being there for the right reasons, with the belief that profits will take care of themselves. It's almost a spiritual principle. You focus on doing the right things. You never really control the outcomes. Think about that. We have this illusion in life and in business that we actually control the outcomes, and therefore I hold you accountable for the outcome. The fact is, you can only do what you can do. You only control your actions, and the outcomes eventually will be a function of 100 other things: the macroeconomic environment, what your competitors are doing, any other things that happen, etc. You don't really control all of that. So when you can only control your actions, you must focus on those actions and make sure that you are doing the right things for the right reasons. And guess what? Over time, outcomes take care of themselves. It's a fundamental principle of this. 93% of stock options are given to ordinary employees. Again, at the typical company, 75% are given to the top 5 individuals. Millions of stock options are given to the CEO, the CFO, and others. And what that does is it creates a huge amount of short-term incentive for certain kinds of behaviors. There's nobody in the world as short-term oriented as a senior leader sitting on a bunch of stock options that are about to expire underwater. And they will do anything to get those numbers up in the short term, even though that may have negative consequences in the long term. So they don't do that at all here. Everybody has stock. Everybody's long-term well-being is tied in with how the company as a whole does. None of them have the ability to move that stock price by undertaking certain short-term actions. Every meeting ends with appreciations at Whole Foods. Board meetings, down to every store meeting. They just talk about what you did, what I really appreciate about what you've done, etc. It really changes people from a state of judgment to a state of gratitude and appreciation. It reflects, it's reflected throughout their culture. They spend hardly any money on marketing because they don't need to. And one episode in their history, I think, illustrates the power of this. What happened on Memorial Day of 1981, when the company was still very young, they had one big store, very successful, Everybody loved shopping there. People loved working there, etc. And then we had the flood of 1981, where $100 million of damage happened. 11 people were killed in that city. The flood waters are 7 feet high. Every single thing in that store was destroyed. All the inventory, all the freezers, refrigerators, cash registers, etc. Nothing was left. There was no warehouse with more inventory. There was nothing in the bank, no savings. They had no insurance. So this was the end of the road for this company. The next morning, there were $400,000 in the red. The founders were standing there thinking, we're facing bankruptcy here. There's no other way around it. And many of the team members are standing around, and many of them are crying, thinking this is the end of the best job they ever had, as they looked at that devastation. The next thing they see, 60, 70 of their regular customers start showing up at the store. They say, sorry, we're closed. They say, well, no, we know that. They're carrying buckets and mops and rags and shovels, whatever else they could find from their garage. I said, come on, guys, we can clean this up. I'm not going to let you go. Stop moping and start mopping. Now you can imagine what a jolt of energy that brought to the people who were just standing around listless and hopeless, right? So, wow, okay, you know what? It's a long shot, but let's give it a shot. So over the next several weeks, these customers and neighbors and anybody else were working shoulder to shoulder with the team members cleaning up this place. The founders told them, listen, we have no money to pay you. I said, it's okay. If you manage to get the company running again, you can pay us later. Otherwise, we tried. That's all. We want to make sure we don't give up without trying. Now, what happened was a bunch of their suppliers came around and they said, wow, there's something special about this company. So I said, you know what, we're going to absorb a lot of that inventory loss, write it off, and we're going to restock you on indefinite credit. And you pay us back when you can. There's something special. We want to be part of this. By the way, they're still doing business with every single one of those suppliers 33 years later. Their bankers came around and they said, wow, there's something special about this business. So we're going to double your line of credit, even though you're completely uncredit worthy. Right? But there's something special here. The original investors, friends and family who had put money into the business, they came around. They said, wow, there's something special here. We're going to double our investment. Whatever we had put in, we're going to put back in, because we don't want to see this thing go. So this was a real awakening moment for this company. They said, wow, there's really something that we're doing right. Right? They experienced the power of stakeholders, and they experienced the power of love. And so without that outpouring of love from our customers, from our team members, from our community, we would not exist today as a company. And it really humbled them to say, are we worthy of this? What have we done? And in the future, how can we make sure that we never let down our customers and our team members and our communities to continue to be worthy of this action, these actions that they've undertaken for us. So it really transformed or cemented in many ways the value system of that company. So they represent these pillars or tenets of conscious capitalism, starting with that higher purpose and a set of core values. This is what we believe in, this is what we stand for, these are non-negotiable. Understanding all of the stakeholders as one system and looking to integrate their interests. But if you look for trade-offs, you will always find them in life. It's very easy to make trade-off based decisions, but that's all we seem to expect of our managers. We tell them make trade-offs, but make them so that they're most favorable to us. But if you reject the idea of trade-offs, then you can find synergies where you thought there none existed. Because all that takes is creativity, and the one unlimited resource on this planet is human creativity. There's a steel company in Korea that I work with called POSCO, and on the entrance to their wonderful steel plant in Pohang, it says resources are limited, creativity is unlimited. Right? And that's what we have to tap into. And that's lying latent in most people. We really haven't extracted it.